Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Report with me, Yasmin Khatun. On tonight's programme, we'll be looking at Sweden as a third arson attack took place to a masjid yesterday, and at Gambia as President Jammeh survives an attempted coup. But first, a ship carrying hundreds of migrants has been rescued by the Italian coastguard after being abandoned by its crew in rough seas in the Mediterranean Sea. This follows an almost identical incident just 3 days ago. Sarah Sai has more.
A boat full of desperate migrants and believed to have set sail from Turkey, abandoned and left drifting without a crew. This horrific situation is the second such case in just a few days. The cargo vessel, known as Ezzedine, and believed to have an estimated 450 migrants on board, had been put on a collision course for the Italian coast after its engine was left on autopilot by a fleeing crew. The Italian Air Force sent a helicopter to lower rescuers onto the vessel, as bad weather conditions made it impossible to board the ship. The boat is now being towed by rescue teams, making its way towards southern Italy. Children and pregnant women were among the migrants on board, most of whom were believed to be Syrian. The latest high-sea drama came 2 days after Italian sailors intercepted another vessel carrying an estimated 900, mostly Syrian migrants. The vessel had also been abandoned by people smugglers who had navigated it from Turkey via Greek waters. Emergency teams set up makeshift hospitals in the Italian port of Gallipoli, where they received the rescued migrants. Many needed treatment following exposure to bitterly cold weather conditions. 2014 saw a massive surge in migrants, many of them from the Middle East and the Horn of Africa, hoping to reach Europe by boat. The United Nations Refugee Agency says 160,000 seaborne migrants arrived in Italy by November 2014, and a further 40,000 in Greece. Thousands more have died attempting the treacherous journey, and with conflicts continuing to rage in much of the Middle East and Africa, sadly many more will continue to risk their lives trying to get to Europe. Sarah Say, The Report.
Joining me to discuss this, Bill Bowring, Professor of Law at Birkbeck College. Bill, thank you very much for joining us. Now, this is a desperate situation we're seeing here. What will happen to these migrants now?
Well, I sincerely hope they're going to get rescued. I mean, that is the main point. And the fact is that Italy is a place that people who are fleeing from war situations are trying to get to, and that's because Italy has a common border with other EU countries.
Italy is carrying a big burden here, but how will they cope with this situation, and how have they been coping over the last few weeks?
Well, I think Italy is certainly in a position to cope. I think the real problem, though, is the fact that other EU countries, in particular Britain, are not pulling their weight. And if you look at the figures from the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, in fact, Britain takes has far fewer asylum applications than other EU countries, as a matter of fact.
Well, can you tell me about this particular situation? Now, there wasn't a driver on board, there wasn't any crew. How does something like this happen?
Well, I think that, as we know, there's a really terrible trade going on where people who are fleeing war situations, for the most part, pay large sums of money to try to get to Italy. And I'm afraid to say that, in many cases, criminals are involved. And the last consideration in their minds is the lives of the people who are seeking asylum. And, of course, the first thing on their minds is making money.
How common are boats like these? I mean, I know we saw the other one just a few days ago, but does this happen frequently?
There's been more and more, as a matter of fact. So in the past months, because of the situation in Syria, right across the Middle East, across the northern part of Africa into Nigeria, there are just very large numbers of people. And of course, what we know closer to home is the fact that there are now very large numbers of asylum seekers around Calais. That's been the news just recently, people trying to get to Britain.
Well, clearly, this is a desperate situation. People in these situations, I'm sure, don't want to be in them. There's a woman who gave birth on this boat. But how do we provide a solution out of this so that there are safe ways for people to travel and reach safety?
Well, I think there has to be a complete change of mind about migrants. And what the United Nations figures show is that the vast majority of migrants stay in their own region. And actually, if you look at Africa, African countries have a wonderful record of looking after migrants and asylum seekers and refugees, and really put Europe to shame. And if you look at the extremely small numbers of people even applying to Britain and the even smaller numbers accepted, there's a great deal more that the European Union, which remains a very rich area, ought to be doing for these people.
Now, these two particular boats were large cargo vessels. We're used to seeing rickety little boats coming across. Are smuggler tactics changing?
Well, I think this is a sign of the amount of money to be made. And I think on the one side, as we were saying, there are really dreadful situations across the Middle East now and in Africa. So many people have no choice really but to flee for their lives with their families. And if they can put the money together, then they fall into the hands of these racketeers.
Now, what changes are taking place in order to stop this? I know earlier this year we did hear about some movement in terms of Italy and what they were doing to stop these boats from coming onto their shores. But what is actually taking place now?
Well, I'm afraid to say that the attitude in Greece in particular, of course, many asylum seekers, many refugees try to get to Greece. The problem with Greece is it doesn't have common borders with the other EU countries, whereas Italy does. So it's not at all surprising that people try to get to Italy. And the problem is that rather than thinking, how do we help these people? Instead, the attitude is, how do we get rid of them and keep them out?
Frontex is the agency that guards the EU borders. What sort of challenges are they facing?
Well, I think the major challenge is trying to maintain Fortress Europe, in which people seeking asylum are not welcome. And given that there are, just to take the Mediterranean, there's a very long seacoast and many islands around Italy and France and Spain. And the fact is, people are going to be trying to get across from the Middle East and from North Africa. So what I would say is that there has to be a complete change of approach.
Is that likely to happen?
No, and not at the present time. And at the moment, of course, you see hysteria about migrants. We've seen in Germany, Chancellor Merkel speaking up very strongly. We've seen in Britain the way that, just as in Germany, xenophobic movements are gaining ground, even though the number of migrants in Britain is extremely small. But unfortunately, there is this mood. And it's in Britain, unfortunately, we don't have leaders who take the kind of stand that Chancellor Merkel has recently taken. And instead, the attitude of the government in this country really fuels the xenophobia and fear of migrants.
How important is it for political leaders like Angela Merkel to come out and display quite strong rhetoric against anti-immigrant sentiment in their countries? I mean, we saw the 2 marches last week. Was it important for Angela to come out in that light, and should we be seeing more of that?
Well, she's a politician I wouldn't agree with most of the time, and she's a conservative politician. But certainly the stand she took was very welcome. And really very brave, and we should see a lot more of that. And it's a great shame that countries like Italy and France and Britain don't take that same kind of a stand.
Earlier in this week, we took a look at Turkey and the legal status that had been granted to Syrian refugees. Kenneth Roth from Human Rights Watch said it was embarrassing for other European nations regards to their relations and how they look at immigrants. Is it an embarrassment, and what should they be doing to change that?
Total embarrassment, I would say. And Turkey, again, is not a wonderful government, and I wouldn't be a supporter of Mr. Erdogan. But there's a tradition in that region, as there is in Africa, that when there are people in desperate need, fleeing from really awful situations as they are, then in those countries, people are taken in. And the fact is that in Europe, in the EU countries, there's a totally different attitude. And it is, as you say, that is shameful.
Well, thank you, Bill, for joining us for that. But that's all we have time for in this part of the programme. Do stay with us for the second part of the show, where we'll be taking a look at the rest of the day's top stories and what you've been saying on Twitter. Stay with us.